Hello y'all, and welcome to YoungFolkKnits. Today I'm going to share my top 5 favorite cable knit sweater patterns. Hello y'all, and welcome back to YoungFolkKnits. My name is Casey, and if you're new here, this is a channel where I share all about my love of fiber arts. Today I want to talk specifically about 5 cabled knitting patterns. These are some of my favorite. Honestly, when it comes to cable knit patterns, there's too many for me to say this is my favorite. But these are definitely some of my top 5. There really is just something about cables and wool, about winter and cable knit sweaters. They go together like peanut butter and jelly, like Bonnie and Clyde, like tea and biscuits. They go together like Rama Lama Lama, Kadingity Ding Dong. We go together like Rama Lama Lama, Kadingity Ding Dong. If you don't know what that's from, you're probably not old like me. Gotta love Olivia Newton-John. I have created a Ravelry bundle that has quite a few of my favorite cable knit sweaters, but let's chat about 5 that are at the top for me. I am wearing a cabled knit that I actually completed a few years ago. This is the Lana Vest by Irene Lynn. It's so big now, like it's way too big. In fact, I actually have been considering steeking this down the sides. I mean, it's like inches and inches way too big. So I was thinking that I could steek it down both sides and have it open, totally separated, and then do some toggle buttons, like 2 toggle buttons on each side, and I think that might be fun. So that might be in my future. I knit this using Biche et Bouche Le Gros Lamb's Wool, which is an Aran weight. Very heavy Aran weight in my opinion, but I really think it has great stitch definition. It's very woolly, it's very light. So I think it turned out great. It just doesn't fit me. I need to make some adjustments to it, either that or just frog it and reknit a different size. But I actually kind of like the idea of steeking it and cutting out, you know, quite a bit and then overlaying it so it would be like a button up on each side with 2 toggles. I'm gonna think on this. Before we jump right into the patterns though, I'd like to give a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is actually the largest online learning community for creatives like us. There's such a wide breadth and depth of topics that whatever you're interested in learning about, there's a class for you. I am multi-craftual and I love learning new things. But knitting will always be my first love. And speaking of cable knitting, that can be a little bit daunting to some, which is why I think a great class, if you're interested in really honing your skills in cable knitting, is called Next Level Knitting Cables. This class is taught by Angela Hahn, who is a knitwear designer, and it really takes you through everything you need to know about cables, starting with what, how, and why, and then you actually dive into a project. It is a cowl that uses a sample of different cables. So it takes you through finding the right materials, casting on, how to do a right cross, a left cross, and even what to do if you drop stitches. That can be terrifying in cable knitting, so I think this is so helpful all the way around. And when you're done, you have a beautiful finished project. Not to mention the fact that the community on Skillshare is great. You can post your projects on the class and you can get great input, be inspired by others' works, and make some fun connections. So whatever your interest might be, photography, creative writing, video editing, art, illustration, knitting, sewing, there's going to be expert instructors and a great community to help you hone these skills. And that is why I'm so excited to partner with Skillshare again this month. The first 500 people to click the link in my description are going to receive a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. So choose your topic and you can get started today. Thanks again, Skillshare, for sponsoring today's video. In no particular order, 5 of my favorite cabled knitting patterns. Speaking of vests, the first pattern I want to share is a vest pattern, and it is by Aegyo Knits. So this is called the Eurus Slipover, and I have been in love with this pattern since it was released. It came out in February of this year, 2024, and I honestly don't know why I haven't knit it yet because it has been at the top of my list. I think it might be because it's knit flat, it's kind of an interesting construction, it's not in the round, and I think that it just kind of keeps getting bumped down the list for easier projects. But I think the results would be stunning. So this is an Aran weight gauge. It's 21 stitches and 25 rows in the honeycomb pattern. And the designer used a yarn I cannot pronounce, but it is an Aran weight yarn. So this, like I said, is a really interesting construction. You start knitting flat and you knit along this way. And then you have your neck opening, and then you cast back on, and you're continuing to knit. It wraps around, and then on one side, it is closed with toggle stitches. And that's kind of where I got the idea to possibly modify this into that similar construction to make it fit better. But you're also getting a look that you cannot really achieve by knitting up and down because your cables will be in a certain direction. But by knitting the pattern this way, your cables are actually going to go this way. So you've got a different look than you would if you had knit it with a conventional construction. I actually think that this would be really lovely in it. Perennial is classified as a DK weight yarn, but I feel like I could easily get gauge with a 19 stitch cabled pattern with Perennial. If you're a tight knitter, you might not be able to. It's a fairly lofty yarn, but it's also pretty economical, and I think it holds up really well. So that's, I think, a really nice yarn. If you needed to add a little bit to get your gauge, you could always hold it with a mohair. Like I said, I'm a very loose knitter, and my yarn just doesn't squish because I'm so loose. And because of that, I would have no trouble meeting that gauge with Perennial. I also think that the Cascade 220 would be really lovely in this. There's so many great options for a round, bouncy, full yarn. And I do want to mention that when it comes to cable knitting, I think that if you want to have lovely, beautiful, defined cables, you need to use a yarn that is correct for the project. 2-ply and under is really best for lace. Singles, not good for cables. Singles and 2-ply, I think, is much better for lace or stockinette. 2-ply could kind of go either direction, but whenever you block 2-ply, it's going to flatten out, and that really helps with lace knitting because it opens up your lacy eyelets. But with cable knitting, you want the plies to push against each other and be big, bouncy, puffy stitches that are well defined. And to achieve that, you're going to need a 3-ply or higher. So a lot of times, yarns that are described as great for cables are non-superwash. They are 4-ply, 6-ply, 8-ply yarns. They're described as round, and they a lot of times have some stretch and bounce to it. And I think that wool yarns in general are considered some of the best for cable knitting as well. There's 2 cardigans that I really love and would like to share. First of all is one that I have recently come across, but I have fallen in love with, and I really hope that I can knit it at some point in the future. So the first one is called the Smockey Cardigan by Monmi Choi. And it is a DK weight, which the sample was knit in Biche et Bouche lay lamb's wool, one of my absolute favorite yarns. I really, really love that. It's such a woolly yarn, but it's not scratchy, in my opinion. I find it to be rustic yet easy to handle on my skin personally. I know that's a very personal thing as to itch factor with yarns, but I really, really love it. And I think it has great stitch definition. So this pattern has quite a few different cables in it, but it also has some beautiful smocking details. And I think that all of that put together just makes incredible texture. It's absolutely beautiful. It has some nice wide sleeves in the style I see a lot from Sari Nordland and Aegyo Knits. So I think that's beautiful. This comes with a finished bust circumference of a 41 inch to a 64 inch. And I find that it's really nice to be able to choose the size you want based off of the amount of ease you want. So you don't always have to follow the recommendation. You don't always have to follow the letter size that you might be, but instead I like to look at the finished bust circumference and think about the amount of ease you personally prefer and choose your pattern from there. I think this one is beautiful. I would definitely want to knit it in a yarn that wasn't so dark that you couldn't see all of the cables. I think a dusty, it doesn't have to be, you know, a white or cream yarn. I think there's some beautiful dusty lavenders and grays and blues that would look beautiful, and that this texture would shine in. I think that the called for yarn is great. There's just so many wonderful DK options. If you want a soft version of this, I personally am a huge fan of Sandnes Garn Double Sunday. I know that some people feel like it has a little bit of an inconsistency in the twist. I love it. I've never had any problem with it. I've knit multiple sweaters. In fact, one of my favorite sweaters that I have ever made was knit with Sandnes Garn Double Sunday. So I personally am a huge fan, and I like the fact that it's 100% non-superwash wool with a more reasonable price tag. So I'm off for that one. Another cabled sweater that I want to share is the Porter cardigan. This is a great option for the male bodies, but I also think it looks so fun, oversized, and fits great on a female body. I absolutely love the cables on this. It is knit in pieces, and you are going to seam it together, which is not always the funnest, but you're going to get something that doesn't stretch out. It is knit flat. Sometimes knitting cables flat is easier to keep up with because you don't usually cable on the wrong side. So it's easy to remember what row you're on based off of knowing, am I on the right side or am I on the wrong side? If you're knitting in the round, a pullover, sometimes you might get a little lost as to which row you're on because you're always on the right side. I like knitting always on the right side because there's not as much purling, but they each have their own advantages. This is knit with a worsted weight yarn. I am in the middle of knitting the sweater for my husband. I have not finished it yet. Hopefully I will finish it while we're both still living. I am the worst gift knitter ever, but he needs this sweater. I am using the Hudson & West Forge base, and it is so soft. It's so lovely. It's a very special yarn. And the navy in this, it's just the right navy, that it's not so dark you can't see the cables, but it has a very classic in the library type vibe. Love this. So this needs to be finished up very soon. And I think that shawl collar is absolutely wonderful. I had a great tip from someone else who is knitting this sweater that with the sleeves, you should knit them 2 at a time. They are knit flat, which means you're not even having to magic loop them, but you can guarantee that they're going to be the exact same length. They're going to end on the exact same row. Everything is going to be identical. And I think that was a fabulous tip. And I'm actually have switched over to knitting those sleeves 2 at a time. I just cast on the other sleeve and then put it on the needle whenever I hit the same row as I was on with the other sleeve. So I think that that is a great tip that I'm going to continue to use for all sleeves that are knit flat and seamed. All right, and now for a couple of pullovers. One that I want to share is a pattern by Sari Nordland, and it is from her book Softly Timeless Knits. This is the Antiope sweater, or Antiope. I'm not sure exactly how to say it. I need to ask her. But it is an absolute gem. And if you are interested in joining in the Softly Cal that Sari and I are hosting, this would be such a great pattern. This, to me, is the epitome of the most amazing cable knit sweater you would ever need. If you were only ever going to knit one cable knit sweater, this would be one that I would be willing to say, this is my pick. This is the one I'm going to knit. It's so beautiful. It is a DK weight yarn, and she used Sandnes Garn Petite Knit Double Sunday. As you know, I am a huge fan. It's in a classic color. The cables look amazing. This is such a round, bouncy yarn. It's easy on your hands to knit with. And everything about these cables are beautiful. From the raglan stitches, there's so much detail. Not only that, but the center panel with the cables, I find, has so many little things that make it beautiful. For instance, the cables on the edge have a beautifully rounded edge that keep the cable pattern contained, but make it look very finished. A lot of cable patterns in sweaters at the edge of the chart will just sort of end. The cable just ends, but the cables aren't looped into finish. And I think that she put so much thought into this. It's absolutely beautiful. I love the honeycomb cables in it. There's quite a few different cables, and it's just beautiful. It's very classy. If you make the sweater and you wear it, everybody's going to be like, where did you get that sweater? And then they're going to ask you to make them one. So maybe you don't want to wear it, but it's absolutely beautiful. Okay, I have so many patterns I want to share, but I'm going to try to limit myself. So the next one I want to share is just absolutely classic. It's oversized, it's beautiful, it has a lovely raglan construction, and it is by Lana Vest. Now, I hope I pronounced that correctly because Cami Jo Knit, she's my girl. She sends me voice messages and tells me how to pronounce these names. So hopefully I got that right. It's a lovely name, and I hope I did it justice. But this is such a beautiful sweater. It is knit in Lana. It's a gorgeous 15 stitch gauge. But if you see these pictures, I mean, that stitch definition is beautiful. This is going to knit up fairly quickly. I really love how there is a simple use of cables and seed stitch. This is not going to be difficult. It's going to knit up fairly quickly, and it's just plain pretty. So I think that in the sample, Lina held Lana Tilla with Lana Saga, or in the other sample, it was just the Sandnes Garn Koss held single, and that is an Aran weight, I do believe. So I think you're looking to get in an Aran weight gauge. I'm just really enthralled with this sweater. I think it's beautiful, and I think I need one. I think that I could reasonably knit this and actually finish it. I have so many projects on at once. I find myself having to be very judicious with what I cast on, but I'm absolutely enraptured with this sweater. Okay, I lied. I'm going to share one more, and it is a pattern by Nora Gone, and it was included in the book by Lobby Anime, Worsted. Now, this pattern, Perennial, is the reason I bought the book. I loved so many of the patterns, but this one was by far my favorite. I think it's so stunning. It's so simple. It has such a lovely design, but a beautiful structured use of cables. Nora Gone is a genius. I love everything that she makes, but this is one of my favorites. Yet again, I cannot believe that this has not made it onto my needles yet. I especially love that back detail of the single column of beautiful, beautiful cables. And on the front, I find it to be very flattering the way that the cables are shaped, where you have multiple columns and they taper in. I think that always looks good if you taper towards the waist with a pattern or a cable design or a chart. Anything that shows tapering is going to be very flattering at your waist. So I love this design. The sample was knit in Lobby Anime Corey Worsted, which is actually a DK weight yarn. I think that it shows the weight on here as worsted, but the reason it is named Corey Worsted is because of how it's spun. It is spun worsted, not the weight of it being worsted. It's a 22 stitch gauge, and I mean, I could not get a 22 stitch gauge with worsted yarn. Am I alone here, or are some of y'all my loose knitter people too? Sometimes I feel like the lonely large gauge queen over here. There were a few more patterns that I consider to be some of my absolute favorite cable knit patterns that you can find in the Ravelry bundle. I would love to hear what your favorite cable knits are. But I would have to say that right now, today, at the top of my list is the Agio Knit Eurus Slipover. Hopefully I will get those knit before too long. Thank y'all so much for being here, and thank you Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Until next time, happy knitting y'all.